Hi, Alison Marsden here from Gardening by Design. Welcome to this box of tricks topic. I do hope that you enjoy using it to help you become a more confident gardener. Please let me know how you get on, and happy gardening.
Right plant, right place. Part 1. What plants need to thrive. Whether you are choosing a single plant for that particular spot in your garden, or are replanting an entire border, you want plants that will thrive and play their part in making your garden look great throughout their life. Since you are watching this topic, I'm guessing that in the past some of your choices may have been, well, less than spectacularly successful, let's say. And the way to change that is to understand how we do or should choose plants. First, a little question for you. Have you ever walked around a nursery or garden centre and bought a plant that was in flower or full of coloured foliage just because you really liked it there and then? Or looked at the rows and rows of plants on offer and then walked out without buying anything for that space in your garden because you were overwhelmed by the choice and concerned that the plant may fail? You have? I thought perhaps that was the case. Well, don't worry. Most people have, and I won't tell. What you need is some way of narrowing down the tens of thousands of plants that can potentially be grown. By the way, I'm talking about the UK here with its temperate climate. If your garden is somewhere more challenging, then you may have less choice, but it is of course equally important to get it right. There are two big filters to reduce the number of plants you need to consider something more manageable. Appearance, which is where you ask questions like, is your garden modern or cottagey? And what shapes and colours support that style? Not all plants will match up and your choice will be reduced. But that's a whole other topic for a whole other day. Today we're talking about suitability. Will the plant thrive? And the combination of suitability and appearance will give you a short list of plants that will, any one of which will be ideal for that gap in your border. You simply then head off and see which one of them is available at your chosen outlet. Make a quick and confident selection and spend the time previously wasted in wandering and wondering with a cup of tea and a big slice of cake, all funded by the knowledge that you are not going to waste time and money watching another valuable plant fail. Sounds like a plan? Let's get on with it. The key to understanding which plants will thrive in any particular spot in your garden is to understand two things. What plants need to grow and what you are offering. These are in essence two sides of the same coin. Match them up and bingo. So the big question for you is, what do all plants need in order to grow? In my answer, I have identified 5 things that all plants need, and at this stage we're talking generally, not about individual chemical elements. The birds will twitter quietly while you come up with your thoughts, and then we can compare and I'll explain my answers. Ready? This is how I look at it. The 5 things that plants need are air, water, nutrients, light and warmth. It's quite likely that some of you mentioned carbon dioxide, which is true as plants take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, and I have included these within air, more in a moment. And you may have said soil, which is perfectly understandable, but I prefer to emphasise nutrients, as these are what the plants take in from the soil, along with water and oxygen. In fact, plants can be grown without garden soil at all. Many commercial glasshouse crops, including salads and strawberries, are supplied with water, oxygen and nutrients direct to the roots without any soil in between. by the way, this need for oxygen is the reason that I list air, not just carbon dioxide, and we'll talk more about that later. Next, water. Like cells in our own bodies, plant cells contain mainly water, in their case up to 90%, and it's used to transport dissolved nutrients, gases and sugars around the plant. Nutrients are chemical elements that the plant needs for various processes by which they grow. There are dozens, and many will be familiar: nitrogen, iron, calcium, for example. Nutrients are the building blocks of plants, and so we take in the same nutrients when we eat the plants. Yes, leafy green vegetables, including spinach, really do contain a good supply of iron. Light, of course, is needed for photosynthesis, the process by which plants convert sunlight into usable energy in their leaves. I find it wondrous that all our food and most of our fuel energy come via green plants. And of course, the very oxygen that we breathe is a byproduct of photosynthesis too. Warmth is the thing that sometimes gets forgotten. Many plants withstand very low freezing temperatures in winter, but all need some degree of warmth to grow. Everything that a plant does is a chemical reaction, and increasing the temperature makes it happen more quickly until you overdo it and destroy it. So it makes sense that as the weather warms up, each reaction in the chain speeds up and the plant grows away actively instead of just ticking over like it does in the winter. So to recap, the 5 things that all plants need are air, water, nutrients, light and warmth. And now I can almost hear you ask, if all plants need all these same 5 things, why don't all plants thrive everywhere? The answer is that all plants need the same 5 things, but not in the same amounts. And that is why you need to match the plant to the spot you have for it. At the moment, this diagram shows the things that plants need. In order to match these to what you're offering in the garden, we need to add a couple more bits. Firstly, it helps to think about what influences the availability of water, nutrients, light and warmth in your garden. Air needs no further consideration. There's never a shortage of that. I have already mentioned that water and nutrients are taken up through the plant's roots. And in a garden, the availability of these is governed by the soil type and structure. A gardener can never ignore the soil for long. Light and warmth are governed by the above ground situation. For example, does the border face north or south? Is it shaded by trees? And for warmth, is the garden exposed to winter winds, or are you looking at a sheltered corner? We'll consider each of the 4 factors in more detail and look at some of the plants that suit various conditions in parts 2 and 3 of this topic. The final piece of the jigsaw is habitat. You may associate that word more with endangered animals than the plants in your garden, but all these living things have a natural habitat or environment where they have evolved over thousands of years, and plants are no exception. Why is this interesting? Well, if you know the conditions in terms of soil and situation where a plant grows naturally, then this tells you a lot about what you need to offer it in your garden. And conversely, to find something that will suit a particular or a particularly challenging spot in your garden, you can look at plants that come from a similar situation in the wild and consider them and their cultivated cousins. We'll pause on this diagram again for a few moments, as it contains a lot of information that underpins the whole process of deciding what plants will thrive in your garden. While the music plays, see if you can mentally add a statement to each of the boxes from what I've said before, and after that we'll explore habitats a bit more. Don't worry if that seems a bit obscure. It'll make sense with some examples. So on to plant habitats. All the plants you saw in the introduction to this topic thrive in different conditions, and all can potentially be grown in your garden. It's worth spending a few minutes talking about plant habitats, because every plant species is native to somewhere, and that somewhere comes with a particular soil and situation. And as we know, these are crucial to choosing the right plant for the right place. The key message is that however challenging your garden is, there will be plants growing out there somewhere that are adapted to dealing with similar conditions, as long as you can supply some degree of the 4 key requirements. Obviously, no plant will grow in the darkness of a cave or with no sustenance at all. A very useful activity is to set your expectations of what will be happy in a particularly difficult spot by spending a moment visualising the natural environment that mirrors your garden. What on earth am I talking about? Well, say that your border receives no direct sunlight because it is shaded by the house. Whereabouts in the countryside do you have little sunlight reaching the ground? How about in a wood? This gives you an indication of what types of plant you will need to choose. And, as a sneak peek of the video on light and shade, I can reveal that in woodland you do not get many bright and blousy flowers. At the other end of the scale, if you have a sunny spot with a stony or sandy soil at the base of a wall, you are going to need drought-tolerant plants from a hot sunny climate. However, before you get carried away with tropical visions, remember that even in a sheltered corner, most gardens in the UK experience some freezing nights any time from November to March. Where then do you find frost and drought-tolerant plants? A good place to look is around the Mediterranean and up mountains such as the Alps. That's enough on this subject for now. You'll see examples of plants for places as the topic goes on. Before we end, let me reassure you about a few things that make this approach entirely practical. Firstly, I am not suggesting that you should only use plants that are native to where you live. For most people, that's not the point of a garden at all. And even if, like me, you want to support the local wildlife, many non-native plants provide great food and shelter. The point about habitats is to understand what conditions a plant needs, regardless of where in the world it grows. Of course, you do not have to match exactly the natural environment of any plant in order to have it in your garden, especially where those conditions are extreme. Plants may have evolved to cling on to life in that situation, but would be more than happy with a more readily available supply of food and water, or not being frozen solid for weeks in the winter. But, and this is a big but, this is likely to change how they grow, and you cannot go too far. A plant adapted to hot, dry conditions will struggle to survive months of cold, heavy soil in winter. And finally, I know, and you know, that not all garden plants are to be found out in the wild. Almost since man has been cultivating plants for food and ornament, we have been selecting the biggest fruits and the brightest flowers to collect seed from. And in the modern era, plant breeding has brought out many new versions of familiar plants. Fundamentally, though, the vast majority of the DNA is still identical to the original species growing out in a field, cliff, or bog somewhere, so the conditions that the plant needs are basically unchanged. You will always be reading the label, of course, before you buy a plant anyway, so check for any specific requirements of a particular new variety. For example, some may have sacrificed a degree of winter hardiness for bigger flowers. We're pretty much at the end now, with just time for a recap. So can you name the 4 key requirements of all plants, in addition to air? Yes, water, nutrients, light and warmth. And so why do different plants thrive in different conditions when they all need the same things? because different plants have evolved to survive with different amounts of those things. And what are the two facets of your garden that most influence the availability of these four requirements? I'll give you a clue. They go in pairs. I hope you remembered soil and situation, basically what happens above and below ground. And the final part of the picture, how can you get an idea of the needs of a plant and select plants that match the soil and situation in your garden? By looking at the habitat, where the original species evolved and adapted. I'm afraid that there is always a little homework to do to get the best out of the box of tricks topics, and you need to start to understand your soil type and structure. So it's back out into the garden to have a good look at your soil in the different beds and borders. Squeeze a handful of soil with some water if it's dry. Is it sticky or crumbly? Is it smooth or gritty in between your fingers? After it rains, does water drain through the soil quickly, or does it stay wet for a long time? And have a look at how deep is the soil layer into which you plant before you reach something more solid underneath. The reason for finding these things out will become clear next time. And after that, you'll be ready to move on. And that's the end of part 1. When you come back and are ready to view the video for part 2, we'll be examining how soil influences the availability of water and nutrients to plants. And, the best bit by far, we'll look at some lovely, suitable plants. See you soon.